Welcome to the University of Cambridge Centre for Creative Writing series of conversations with writers. I'm Midge Gillies, and today I'm talking with my colleague and fellow writer, Dr. Lucy Durneen. This conversation was recorded early on in lockdown, and in it we talk about how that experience affects the way we write and the way we research. I talk about a project I'm working on, which is a biography of Piccadilly Circus in London. And just for context, during our conversation, I mentioned briefly the celebrations in 1900 surrounding the relief of a British garrison called Mafeking. The event has been largely forgotten, but I talk about it as perhaps the first time that Piccadilly Circus became a centre for large public gatherings. I hope you enjoy the conversation and that it gives you some tips for your own research, whatever writing you're doing.
So how's the writing going this week? How is everything?
So it started at the weekend. So I've been doing lots of research and I decided I'd got to start writing. So I'm working on this project, which is a biography of Piccadilly Circus. And I've been doing endless chapter breakdowns and plans. And then I thought I really must start writing. And so on Saturday, I sat in front of my computer for about 5 hours. And then I did finally write something, and I wrote 1,000 words, and it felt so good. I mean, not because it was the world's best prose, but just to get writing again was fantastic. And then I wrote another 1,000 words the next day. So I feel so relieved, really, because you suddenly think, how did I ever do this? Can I do this? Does anyone want to read this? I still think that, but at least I've got something down on the page. So that felt really good.
And was that like starting at the beginning, or
no?
Because I suppose with non-fiction you can dip in and out.
Yeah. So I was going to start with the beginning. So the beginning is going to be about what Piccadilly Circus is and what it means to people, and what it is as an idea. So the thought of being a meeting place. So there used to be a saying that if you waited for long enough in Piccadilly Circus, you'd meet everyone in the world you'd ever met or known. And of course, it's empty now. Or about the idea of it as a centre of the empire, about somewhere that people feel very kind of warm towards, like in the First World War song, or kind of when people were abroad in the trenches, they'd have Piccadilly Circus as one of their trenches. So an idea of being something that you kind of latch onto in a kind of nostalgic form. So I've got lots of thoughts about that, but I thought I'll leave that until probably the very end of the book, which is what I normally do. I write the very first bit at the end when everything's been digested and I've got a sense of what on earth I've been writing about. So I thought I'd start on chapter 2 because the beginning of the book, it feels a bit knotty to me. So I started, so it's basically, I'm concentrating on the first half of the 20th century. And I thought that chapter 2 would be, I might start with the relief of Mafeking and the celebrations in Piccadilly Circus, because it was the first time that it became a centre for celebration. So, and Eros was there as well. So the statue of Eros the fountain. Yes, he had alighted there. So I've read lots of accounts in the Times, the New York Times, about crowds behaving very badly, and the Times reporter saying people were just waving things from balconies and items of clothing, and he said very coyly, some of which you'd normally only ever see on a clothesline. So I presume that means women's drawers. So I wrote that, and that's quite fun to do. And then the second bit of that chapter is going to be talking about Eros and the sculptor who produced that. And he actually turned out to be a really interesting person, and about the model for Eros. So that was my second 2,000 words. So I feel obsessed with the subject, which is very promising. And I come out with all sorts of weird statements, and my family say, what are you talking about? You need to tell us you're talking about Piccadilly Circus, because I just blurt out these lines.
Switched into Piccadilly mode.
Yes, yeah.
But, I mean, that sounds so interesting. I can't wait to read this. Just the idea of a biography of a place, I think, is just so intriguing. But it's really odd also that it just feels like, in a way you could never have imagined, it feels like it's probably even more important to be doing it now somehow, isn't it? That And do you think that first section, thinking of it as a meeting place, is going to have to be different now, isn't it? It's going to have
yes, and actually I've changed my my screensaver. So it used to be a lovely picture of my dog in a paddling pool, and now it's a picture of the Queen on that huge screen at Piccadilly Circus.
Yes, I thought that's where it was. Yeah, we will meet again.
Yes, exactly. And it's got a quote from that line where she says something about, you know, things are going to get better, we'll see our loved ones again. And Piccadilly Circus is empty apart from a few cyclists in Lycra who I think are probably delivering things. So it feels like the place has changed dramatically. And I remember when I was first talking to my publisher about writing this, saying, how am I ever going to get to wander around Piccadilly Circus when it's empty and I can see it, and I'm going to have to get up really early to go around. And now you can just look at pictures of it in this deserted way, and it does feel very different, and the idea of being in a crowd is very different now as well.
Which kind of conveniently gives things a very nice narrative arc in a way, doesn't it? Because to bring it up, that idea of celebration and it also now being a symbol of something else, of a different kind of togetherness. I read this very interesting article in the New Yorker about it's by the writer Karen Russell, and she was talking about, or looking at murmuration and, you know, birds kind of
their
sort of coordinated movements, and she was likening the lockdowns to a similar kind of human murmuration, that we're not taking flight, but in the same way we're all sort of in a coordinated way going in a different direction. We're sort of, our formation is turning home, and we've all done it in sort of the same time, in the same moment. It's like the sort of the crowds have all just sort of sucked away, and now we're going to, at some point, I guess we'll all flood back into Piccadilly Circus, and it will once again be a symbol of.
Yes, or will we be permanently scared of crowds? I mean, you read accounts of children being terrified of strangers when they're out on their daily walk. So I don't know if it'll have that same resonance or if it'll change completely.
Very true. But the project wasn't always about Piccadilly Circus as a place, was it? That's sort of part of its evolution.
Yeah, so I originally wanted to write about a place called the Café de Prix, which is in Coventry Street, which is off Piccadilly Circus. So it was a very kind of fancy nightclub. And then in the Second World War, which is really my period where I feel happiest, it was a kind of designated shelter, and said it was blitzproof because the dance floor was below pavement level. And then in March 1941, a bomb came down one of the ventilation shafts and unfortunately killed lots of people. But it was a very odd experience, because some people were killed by the force of the blast and looked as though physically they were unscathed, and other people were just disappeared, and there was looting which was covered up, and there were lots of different accounts of it, and really interesting accounts in later life as well. So what's her name, who wrote Ballet Shoes? Noel Stretfield wrote a novel based on it, and probably was there at the time. And there was a real element of chance in it. So if you happened to choose that moment to go and powder your nose, you probably would have survived. Or if you chose the best table in the place, then you probably would have died. So I wanted to write it all about that very condensed evening, and have done quite a lot of research about that. And eventually a publisher said, yeah, you can write about that, but actually I think you should write about, widen it out and make it the whole of Piccadilly Circus, which appeals to me because I like the idea of structure and creative nonfiction, and trying to write biographies of often inanimate objects. So I like the idea of writing a biography of a house, for example. That really appeals to me. And I think I can't imagine writing a kind of cradle to grave biography now in the kind of very old-fashioned sense that we always used to read.
So is your structure largely chronological, or is it because you've got all these different location, well, sort of, you know, particular buildings? Are you doing it building by building, or are you taking a sort of a tour around the circus? Or
so a bit of both. So mainly chronological, so that I can get my brain around that, but also tethering it to different buildings. So for example, so the Café de Prix will come into its own in the 1930s and the Bright Young Things. But also other buildings like Simpsons, again in the 1930s, which was this amazing, it's now Waterstones Piccadilly, the bookshop. But the idea that men needed a shop, a department shop, and that that's where you could go and buy your aeroplane or your dog or your whatever you wanted to buy. And the Regent's Palace Hotel, which at one time was the biggest hotel in Europe, and there were lots of kind of nasty goings on there, which I'm going to include, and they start in the first bubble, because there was a doctor who was injecting people so they didn't have to go back to the front, and then there were all sorts of other stories later on, and then you've got Lyon's Corner House and the Tea Room, and Swan and Edgar's the another shop. So I'm hoping to weave in social themes like the shop girl, gay life, then prostitution, musical theatre, even things like the flower girls who used to hang around Eros, and how it's a really strange place because it's a kind of meeting place and where you can come and be someone else and then go back to your normal life, and how it's a kind of area of change.
Sounds amazing. I can't wait. Can I be a big read and have a quick sneak peek of the drafts? But I was going to ask something very important there, and I've completely forgotten what it was going to be. But it will come back to me. But how do you? Yeah, no, that's what it was. How do you even find out this stuff? I mean, like, there's a doctor injecting people at a hotel so they can't go back to the front. How do you even come by that kind of information? Is it just that you're just always uncovering something and then it's like one of those serendipitous things, or?
Well, I think you have to kind of be on the lookout for good stories. So that was, and often good stories are in footnotes or just asides in other books. So the bit about the doctor was just a throwaway line in a book by Matthew Sweet about, I think it's called something like the West End Front. And I thought that sounds really interesting. So I kind of followed it. I tried to find out more in the Times, and then the Lancet had a really interesting article on it. And then it seemed that there was this whole worry about people escaping, going back to the front through doctors doing these nefarious deeds. And it was really interesting how the Lancet was saying, oh no, he shouldn't lose his role as a doctor, and I want to find out why. And I mean, it's quite comical as well, because there are accounts of police officers hiding in wardrobes in the hotel and taking notes of all that's being said on the other side of this. The doctor is about to inject this poor soldier.
It could be a film. Sounds. I know we've talked before about just how many films are based on creative non-fiction.
Yeah.
You can see got so many stories just emerging. It's just such a sort of fertile ground for.
Yes, and also, you know, that might be, if you wrote that in a novel, it might sound a bit unbelievable or far-fetched, but you don't have that concern if you're writing non-fiction, because it's there, you know, you've got the facts.
So what are the concerns then when you're writing creative non-fiction for you? What do you, if you kind of know that it doesn't matter how weird and sort of wacky the stories become, you know that they're based on something real, and you know that you've got that evidence, but what else is a problem in a way?
I think it's always what you leave out, and that's what my first editor said. So I said, what makes a good biography? And he said, it's what you leave out that makes a good biography. And I think there's always a temptation, because you do so much research and you can't possibly, and you shouldn't include it in a book. It's knowing what to leave out, and also being a bit aware of your obsession and keeping it at bay, and thinking, so what's the story? Is this interesting? Does the reader need to know this? Are they going to carry on reading? Because I used to think, well, I've jolly well spent 3 days finding out, you know, what size feet Queen Victoria had, and that is quite interesting. But other things, you know, the reader's not going to carry on. They'll just stop if they're not interested in what you've presented on the page.
So does that research go anywhere else? Do you do something else with it, or does it just stay in a notebook and become its own archive of like stories?
Well, it normally, I mean, I used to fool myself, you know, I used to think, I'll take that out and I'll put it in a footnote, and then actually doesn't need to be a footnote. So it was a gentle way of taking things out. And my agent used to say, oh, you're going to have lots of really interesting things on the cutting room floor. She had this phrase, the cutting room floor. But I never find that, you know, there's normally a good reason why something's on the cutting room floor. So it's funny, because I wrote a whole biography of Mari Lloyd, the music hall performer. And I'm thinking, and that was the first biography I wrote, and I'm thinking actually I might bring her into this story because it's been a long time since I wrote about her, and I'd like to bring her back into this story. And I think she'd be quite a good person because she had a very racy life, and she would be good to include because she performed at the Pavilion, which was one of the big theatres of variety on Piccadilly Circus.
Right. So
at the time when musical was becoming a bit more respectable, but then films were coming in, so she was just on the cusp of that, and she was banned from the first Royal Command performance and instead did a performance there in place of that. So I might try and get her in there, but I don't want to kind of shoehorn her in there. She's got to earn her place to be in the story.
Well, it sounds like a natural link, sort of interconnected stories, all that.
Oh yes, yeah.
Story cycles in a way, like everything's joined to something else, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you start to see all sorts of patterns when you're writing. So there are two stories that I'm quite interested in. One is about the bright young thing. So there's very kind of wealthy, privileged young people who used to go and do wacky things, and they staged a fake wedding of Piccadilly Circus, and people were outraged by this. Because it seemed to be kind of playing fast and loose with the sacrament of marriage, which was obviously very important in the 1920s. At the same time, there was someone working in the hotel that I want to write about who actually had several fake weddings because they kept changing their gender. So I think there'd be really interesting stories to try and link together and why people were outraged at both, but for different reasons.
So how do you figure out what your obsessions are and the things that are creeping in? How do you know when you're sort of, you're in your own world of just the joy of research and because like it's story that's important, but how do you spot it?
I think it's whether you have an urge to tell someone else about it. And how they react to that as well. And if they just look at you as if, well, that's not interesting at all, then you might have to think about it again. And also, I'm a firm believer of having not just one reader in mind, but maybe a committee of readers, and think, so would they be interested in this? So I might think of you, and I know the things you're interested in, but I know things that you're not probably interested in that I might have to try harder to entice you into the story. So that helps. With that kind of thing. Yeah.
Is it different writing under these conditions? Because I know that you've done crazy stuff like go off into the river to retrieve objects for
yes
yeah, sort of right out into the field and sort of literally get your hands dirty with the research. So is it does it feel very frustrating to not be able to do that, or is that just another phase that we hope can just come later?
Well, I hope it'll come later, but I was thinking about this and thinking about, we often talk about restraint or constraint being a useful thing for a writer, particularly if you're maybe, I don't write poetry, but I know you do, and thinking that you've got to write to specific form. So I'm actually writing in a completely different way. Normally I would spend about a year doing my research and then write. So I've started writing, for me, kind of dangerously early. But I have, because I can't physically go into archives at the moment, it has pushed me to look at other sources. So and it's amazing what is out there, and many more sources are being released at the moment. So I'm really lucky in that because of being a graduate of Cambridge, there are lots of sources that you can use. So I was really excited that I had access to the mass observation diaries, which is brilliant. And so I found some really good stuff about the celebrations after the end of the Second World War, and lots of really good colour there. JSTOR, which lots of people have access to, so academic journals. So I spent 2 frantic days just driving myself silly reading, searching for Piccadilly Circus in those. And then Google Scholar is really useful as well. So if you just put in search terms there, you can come up with all sorts of really interesting things. Cambridgeshire Libraries is brilliant because they have really good resources. The Times Online, also the Dictionary of National Biography, which is fantastic because you know it's a reputable source. And just remembering, like you, I have a lot of books around and I could actually go and use them.
Yeah, we've forgotten that really, haven't we?
Yeah.
Because there's so much else we can just get our hands on instantly.
Yes. Yes. And images as well. So a lot of those are online. So when I was writing about Eros, the fountain and statue, I was trying to find out more about Alfred Gilbert, who designed it, the sculptor. And the National Portrait Gallery has a really amazing photo of him. And I'd read that he wore this, it was described as a sombrero hat. And there he is wearing this hat. So you can kind of describe it and see what it looked like. So I tend to use, or in the past I'd left photos till the very end because it seemed like a kind of treat, but now I'm realizing they're a really important source in themselves.
I would assume that in a way now the temptation is even more to sort of just to explore what's out there, but of course the internet's a dubious place, what can be. So yes,
but there are enough kind of reputable places to go that there's enough of a kind of rabbit hole you could go down without worrying about things that are a bit dodgy. But you can find interesting images that I think are kind of safer, or you can find them in other places. If you're a bit worried about one source, you can normally find another one that's in a museum or something that you feel is more reliable. Yeah.
And I suppose if you acknowledge a source's tenuousness, is that something that you would be comfortable doing? Or
like, what did you have something in mind there?
If you kind of hear like a rumor, or there's a sort of a whisper that you see perhaps suggested in letters, or things that you can't quite corroborate but they seem interesting and you wish you could pursue it, but would you kind of put it in there somehow and say it's not?
Well, I suppose if there's a rumour that people are talking about, then I think it's legitimate and important to talk about the rumour because that's what people were talking about. But sometimes it can be too easy just to do that because you think I'll have it both ways, really. And if it's something that is distorting someone's reputation, then I do think you have to be you have a moral duty to be careful about what you include.
Do you feel that with any of the people that you're writing about for this particular project? Because with the other projects, you've been able to speak to family members, haven't you, and things like that. And maybe that's going to be a bit more difficult this time around, or maybe some of those sort of external sources won't be available, even they won't be alive.
Yeah, no,
so
I think I've reached that point for the first time where people are gone, mainly, who would have remembered any of this. But there are some really interesting archives in the Imperial War Museum of people being interviewed a long time ago, talking about, for example, existing in the Blitz and what it was like. There's a lovely tale of the Café de Paris and the people who were rescued. So this woman was very badly injured and some passing soldier kind of made a splint out of a big wooden spoon in the kitchen and put her on the hot plate. I mean, luckily it wasn't hot at the time. And of nurses cleaning their wounds by dipping bits of glamorous dresses in champagne or using soda siphons. So there are those lovely details that you can use from people who've been interviewed in the past by other people are interested in that.
I suppose it's those details, isn't it, that really bring it properly to life. So
yes, exactly. Yeah.
So do you think we're going to be reading differently because of the pandemic, and because, I mean, this is a tale that has these elements that are stranger than fiction in a way, but do you think that something about what's happening now, is it going to change our appetite for non-fiction, do you think, or make us more drawn to real life tales? Or
oh, I don't know. I suppose I would like to hope so. And I think we're maybe interested in how people in the past have dealt with tough times and trying to, I mean, I've heard people say, I mean, I almost feel as though I grew up in the Second World War because it was important to my parents and that's where they met. And I think this generation of young people are now going through something really difficult and a lot of uncertainty. So perhaps that's their story, that's their narrative, and then it will emerge in different ways.
Yeah, and I suppose we're reading for different purposes day by day in a way, aren't we? That
yes.
Sometimes we just want to escape, and other days it's it's a bit of a different.
Yes, I mean, I watched Mamma Mia, the Here We Come Again, or Off We Go Again, or whatever it's called, and I just loved it, and it was just wonderful to have that that escape and to think, oh, I'd love to be on a Greek island at the moment. And then other times I want to watch something that's quite serious, like I'm watching that thing you told me to watch. What is it called? Safe, yes, yeah. Which I'm absolutely loving. So, but that to me seems a long way from my existence at the moment as well. So that's a kind of different kind of escapism.
Whereas I've been going for Contagion and Outbreak. I
can't understand that at all.
Well, I can't wait to see more of these drafts. It's so good anyway that you're writing. That I think this is a difficult period to be focused, and to be writing again is an amazing.
Yeah, well, it is nice. It's my escape. So I just put my head down and I'm in a different world. So that's wonderful.
So any final tips then for how to keep that focus?
I think
we're being pulled in all different directions.
Yeah, but that's true of any writing, isn't it? It's going back to Stephen King saying you need to have a place that you go to regularly. The muse needs to know where you're going to be. So you need that routine. And perhaps there are more distractions within your home at the moment, but you still need to have a place you go to where you can shut the door if you can, and that people know that's your writing time. And that's true of whenever you're trying to write.
I suppose it's quite helpful for the muse right now, because the muse knows pretty much where we're going to be. So.
Yes. They just need to know the particular room. Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. Put signposts up. So
yeah.
I'm here today.
Yeah, you're not going to be in a cafe.
No.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy writing.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening into this conversation. We hope you can join us again for the next one. You'll find more information about the books we've mentioned and the courses we run in the description box below.